Okay, so just want to make a short video about Glen Hansard, who was tragically killed yesterday in the early hours of yesterday morning on a motorcycle around the Strawberry Beds area there of Lucan, and devastating loss. I was absolutely, I was really sad to hear the news. He would have been one of my favourite singers of that time, of the times that I began to really get into the band back to the late 90s into the early 2000s. And they were a real phenomenon, you could say, back then, because they were really starting to find their feet in the late 90s going into the early 2000s. Like they had they had the album Fitzcarraldo, and Monument and Revelate were the two big songs from that. And then they were gigging all over Dublin and around Ireland as well back then, playing some festivals too, and it was really only a small amount of people who were really into them, who were kind of almost like groupies in a way, going around to the gigs. I was one of those people, you could say, back in the late 90s. I was living and working in North Dublin, and a good friend of mine, another Glen actually, and also from Ballymun, interestingly, we were just going around to see him and the Frames on a regular basis in the late 90s into the early 2000s. And it was a great time to be into the music scene back then, into the Irish music scene, and to be into Glen's music and the Frames. It was just an amazingly kind of almost undescribable kind of feeling that you were into this band who were starting to kind of really find their creative vibe and starting to kind of gain confidence and momentum, becoming better known. And there's a sort of energy associated with a band like that, And if you are there at the same time as the band are finding their moment, it's an amazing feeling. And that's when myself and my friend Glenn were both kind of part of that scene and both experiencing that feeling. And it was a special, very special time, and I kind of feel privileged to have been part of that, Saw so many gigs of the Frames and Glen back then. A lot of them in Dublin, good few of them in Whelan's, maybe one or two in Vicar Street later on. I saw one kind of impromptu gig in Tower Records, which he just sort of, I don't even know if it was announced or not. It might have been the day or two before. And myself and maybe 50 other people in the shop, and he's there playing in front of us, and just this, he just had this kind of spontaneity, this kind of absolute joy of music, and he could just launch into it at a moment's notice. And I think very few people had that kind of gift that he had, and it's a very special thing to witness and to be up front and part of those gigs, and often up near the front in a crowd of maybe a few hundred at most, sometimes even less than that. And I'll never forget those times. They were really something special now, I must say. And so it's really a sad time, to think back to those times, and but also to be sort of happy and privileged, right, to have experienced him and his band as they were starting to ride that crest of a wave and starting to really find their place in the music industry and gaining a proper foothold, not just in the Irish music scene, but also internationally. They were starting to play gigs abroad in Germany. I knew people from Germany, and they were massively into him as well. The albums from back then as well, like Fitzcarraldo was a great album, obviously. Dance the Devil for me was just an incredible album, because I was at those gigs where they were introducing those songs, and playing them sometimes for the first time, and I was at those gigs, and that's something that probably nobody, except for that cohort of a few hundred people back then, many of them based in Dublin, maybe a few down the country as well, we got to experience that, and very few other people got to experience that, and that's something I'll never forget. I remember him playing in a little bar across the road from Bosaurus in Dublin. What was it called? Was it the Copper Pot, something like that? Something like the Copper Pot. I might have the name wrong, but little bar, little place. but kind of a music venue at times, and downstairs, like low roof, and maybe about 60 or 70 of us in this small little kind of downstairs venue with a low roof, and they just lifted the place out of it. Like, it was just incredible. The energy, they just a moment to be there, like with this band at that time. There was just an infectious vibe about them. Like, you can't really describe it. It's something very, very special, and something I've rarely experienced since. Yeah, it was really an incredible time back then. Yeah, I remember going to see him at Witness Festival in was it Punchestown? I think it was Punchestown, or Fairy House or Punchestown, one or the other. Could have been Fairy House, actually. 2003, and he was playing there with the Frames, and it could have been their first festival, certainly their first kind of big festival anyway. And it was back at the time when festivals were only starting to become a thing. Like, Oxygen hadn't arrived back then. Electric Picnic and Oxygen came after that. Witness was the precursor to what became Oxygen. So that was Witness, sponsored by Guinness at the time. So Witness, Guinness, but that was a great gig. Great festival. And the Friends played there, again, to a crowd of, I don't know, 600-700 people, maybe 800 people. Not that big of a crowd in terms of festivals, in a big tent, like. But again, it was great because you could be up the front experiencing this. You knew all the songs. It was just amazing. It was really something unforgettable, yeah, like that was their time, and for me that was their best time. Late 90s up to the early 2000s, maybe the mid 2000s. Those albums of Fiscaraldo and Dance the Devil, and then after that they went a bit more kind of sort of mellow, and the album For the Birds came then. What was it, 2005, maybe, something like that? And it was a good album, it's a decent album, but for me it was just a little bit too slow, a bit too mellow, and I began to kind of lose interest a bit in them after that. And then obviously a few years later came the film Once, and the Swell Season, and and the song, was the song called Once as well? Oh, Falling Slowly, that was a big song, wasn't it? Falling Slowly, and of course they won the Oscar and all that, and that was an incredible time it was great to see him and Marquita getting the recognition they deserved, and it really put him on the map, internationally speaking, as a musical artist. And then he began playing big festivals. He played like Lollapalooza, played Glastonbury, he became like an international star, which was great to see. Like, he was getting the recognition that he really deserved, for everything he put into not just the music world, but also into into these various causes, these social causes, like especially the homeless. He was big into looking after the homeless, making earning money for the homeless, like, and he had this kind of thing with the Simon community, where he would do kind of gigs for the Simon community every year, and sometimes he would sort of busk on Grafton Street, again, just impromptu, just kind of rock up and just start playing, and sometimes this would be for charity, other times it was just him for the joy, for the love of it, playing music. He did a few other kind of charity things online, something for, was it UNICEF or some crowd like that? Not the One Foundation, but One Nation. One has to do with Ireland, I think. Unity or something to do with United Ireland and all that. And obviously, that's a cause which would be close to a lot of Irish people's hearts. And, obviously, like, Glenn cared about not just social causes, like, he was kind of an activist in that sense. But, I think what was good to see was he never kind of, his activism was very genuine, and it was never political as such, really. Okay, you could say the United Ireland thing is kind of political, but that's sort of an innate thing that comes from just being an Irish person who cares about Ireland. Yeah, of course you're going to have some sentiments towards it'd be great if Ireland was united once again, So, but what I mean is, he didn't really hop on board these kind of trendy political causes. He was never one for that, So I kind of appreciated that, because in a time when a lot of musical artists do tend to get quite political and start speaking about political stuff that frankly they don't know anything about in a lot of cases, it was kind of refreshing to see Glenn not really going down that road, And I would argue that he had a certain kind of patriotic sense, and a sense of awareness of his heritage and his culture and where he came from, not just in Ballymun, but also of his Irish background too. And, I thought it was actually nice. I thought it was, maybe nice is not the right word, but there was something very touching about that time. He went on the Curragh in the north of Spain, and they sailed, I think, from, was it San Sebastian over to Santiago de Compostela, I think it was, and they went along the north coast of Spain, him, himself, and a few others. And there was something about that which kind of moved me. I thought, this is someone who's in touch with their roots and in touch with their heritage, and it's not just about music, it's more than that. And there was a depth of character there to Glen that I think is rare, and you don't see in very many, whether it be Irish or international music artists. And that's something that I think I'll probably never see again. And again, I'll just say it one more time, I feel very sort of glad and privileged to have been part of that movement, in a sense, that collective of people who were into the Frames way back before they became well known, and when they had that sort of exuberant youthful energy, and they were really sort of finding their moment, finding their place, and played some of the most outstanding, unforgettable gigs that I will never ever forget. And I'm glad I've been part of that. And I'll miss you, Glen. You were a very special musical artist, and rest in peace, my friend.